Hi there. Valentine's Day has been and gone, and for those lacking a partner, this can be a pretty shitty date on the calendar. But fret no longer, because there's an alternative celebration for you to rejoice in: the death of Captain Cook. In fact, many Hawaiians still get around this annual event to commemorate their ancestors ridding the earth of a man who was responsible for bringing disease and Europeans to their island nation. The death of James, great name, is a strange tale. A few years after successfully charting New Zealand and the east coast of Australia, Cook was given 2 ships by the British Empire to find a way through the Northwest Passage, a mythical route through what is now Canada that would have allowed the Poms to avoid crossing paths with the Spanish when moving from the Atlantic to Pacific Ocean. Cook and his men decided to approach this venture from the west, which led to their accidental arrival in Hawaii in January 1778. After many moons at sea, the crew were desperate to get ashore and fill their kegs with water. However, because of the dangerous winter surf conditions, his men were forced to stay the night. That evening, some of the crew were treated to the local women's hospitality, where they in turn shared their own gifts of gonorrhea, syphilis, and tuberculosis. Cook and his crew returned to the Hawaiian archipelago later that year in November. Upon arrival, some local men came aboard their ships to ask the British if they had any medicine for the lesions that were popping up on their precious bits. A couple months later in January, Cook decided to anchor his ships in a bay known as the Pathway of the Gods. Coincidentally, at this time of year, this bay was where a god of peace named Lono would return from Tahiti to bring fertility to the Hawaiian people. Once ashore, Cook was taken by local priests to a temple where they honoured him as the returning god. They mistook him for Lono due to Cook's remarkable timing and because the sails of his ships looked very similar to the god's emblems. The priests called on the King of Hawaii to return from war on another island and take part in ceremonies for Lono, where they also offered gifts to Captain Cook. Eventually, the British left the bay but were forced to return a day later when one of the ship's masts broke in a storm. This confused the locals because Lono was meant to be able to control the winds. So they began to question whether Cook was really this god of peace or just some pom taking them for a ride. In all the hubbub, some Hawaiians decided to steal the little tinny Cook's crew were using to get from their ship to shore, which infuriated Jimmy. Lashing out in his rage, the captain went with a couple men to kidnap the Hawaiian king and hold him ransom until their boat was returned, a tactic he'd used before in Tahiti and Raiatea. But when the king refused to leave, an angry crowd began to gather around the 3 British men, one of whom deserted them and ran back to the ship, leaving Cook and the other behind to face the locals. While the captain and his accomplice did their best to fight their way through the mob, various accounts of the crew claim he met his maker at the end of several pointy sticks.